Good morning. And a couple of tough acts to follow. 5 of the smartest people in digital and social media, 3 champions of our industry. So really excited to be here. When they asked me to moderate a panel, I said, why would you want a radio guy to follow the people that are really leading the way in social and all the transformations in our industry? And they said, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to show up. They're either going to be hungover or on their way to the airport. I had a vibrator joke, but you just used it, so I won't use that again. But in all seriousness, very glad to be here. My name's Marc Siegel, and at Bloomberg, data and analytics are at the core of everything we do. With over 2,300 reporters and journalists and over 160 news bureaus around the world, we deliver data and timely news to business leaders and financial professionals around the world across multiple screens and multiple platforms. But like many of you in the room, we're trying to look at that data, pay more attention to it, and more importantly, listen to the experts that understand it the best. And that's why I'm excited to be here today. For starters, I don't think the researchers get enough credit. And secondly, we've heard the term big data thrown around a lot over the last few days. So I think it's finally time that we listen to the people that work for companies that live and breathe it. Each of our panelists will have about 10 minutes to speak. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panelists. First, we're going to have Bruce Goerlich. Bruce is Chief Research Officer at Rentrak, which follows consumer viewing habits for TV and the movie industries. Bruce is going to share a little bit about Rentrak's role in the recent presidential election. We also have Allison Arling-Giorgi, Senior Director of Strategic Innovation at the Intelligence Group. Allison will dispel some myths about Generation Z. We don't hear a lot about Generation Z, and tell us what, as advertisers, we can learn moving forward. And finally, Joan FitzGerald, Vice President of Television and Digital Sales at comScore. Joan will shed some light on how her company is measuring the ever-evolving multi-platform world to produce invaluable data. So without further ado, here's Bruce.
Thank you. I guess you can define big data in more than one way. All right, that wasn't that funny. Okay, I want to talk to you today about how to win with advanced targeting. And when I say win, I'm really talking about a single day of the year, one single event, the presidential election. But before I get into the details of that, I want to talk a little bit about who we are in terms of our television measurement. We have a national footprint right now of 8.7 million homes, 22 million TVs. We're basically in 1 in 13 homes in this country. We're in absolutely almost every residential zip code. We are everywhere, including Alaska and Hawaii, which is not on that map. What Rentrak does is bring together, aggregate together, integrate together all the different ways television can be viewed, from cable to satellite to telco. We're the only company that's bringing this together in our huge footprint of almost 9 million homes. And what that allows us to do, that huge footprint, what that allows us to do that no one else can do is really to start integrating and creating advanced targeting capabilities. We can bring in Siemens MRI data. We can bring in advertiser customer segments. And we can do this at geographic levels, at more mathematical fusion levels, and then finally at the household level, direct household matching. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today, because that's what we did with Obama for America. Oh, and I should say this. We are a nonpartisan organization. Although my boss and we did have a bet about who would win, and I managed to win the bottle of scotch because I was for Obama. But we are on both sides, and we did talk to both sides. So while I am presenting to you just about Obama for America, this concept is nonpartisan, and we have offered it, and we are offering it again to both sides of the aisle. So after our conversations with Obama for America, they identified 44 television markets of interest. As you know,
we live in a little electoral college system, and there are about 9 key states where it's really important to win those states, and there was about 44 markets of interest. They had about a 25 million list of homes, of voters. They wanted to basically for us to cover the, report the period from August 2011 to October 2012. And they had 8 to 10 core segments, varied by market. We did some other proprietary stuff with those segments, but there were about 8 to 10 core segments that they wanted us to report on. Basically, they had a name address file, their voter file, and different segments were attached to each name and address with those records in that file. That then went to a third party with the name and address and a segment named like A, B, C, D. That third party then integrated that with our operator addresses and names, and what we got back was a hashed ID, which is our standard hashed ID, with that segment identified to it. So we do not know what that name and address is. We were just using our standard ID. Privacy was protected. The only difference is now attached to that ID was a segment name, which we had no clue what that segment meant. But what we could then do is report back to Obama for America and GMBB, the ad agency, report back what those segment ratings were for that period in those 44 markets from August 11 to October 12. We could report back daily station and network quarter-hour ratings for those 8 to 10 odd segments in each market, or the specific segments for each market. And then Obama for America utilized this specific targeting, this granularization, this segmentation to plan their media buy and to measure the impact of that media buy. So what this chart, and what would a research person be without a chart, and actually I think maybe having a couple charts after panels might make this a little bit more exciting, help wake you guys up. What this chart shows on the horizontal axis is the index of the rating for the B segment against the household rating, and then the vertical axis is the index of the A segment rating. So what you can see here is that there is a slope, there's a difference in viewing patterns. Not a huge difference, but there is a difference in concentration of viewing patterns for these two segments. So if you were going to be buying for segment A, you would be looking at dirty jobs. That would be your first choice, controlling for costs, if you were just looking at sort of concentration. And if you were buying for segment B, you'd be looking at Justin Bieber. This is essentially what they did. They were able to look at the differentiation, concentration of these different segments for each market that they were in, these 44 markets, these 8 to 10 segments, and really understand the difference in viewing patterns at an extremely granular level. So what they indicated was after this, after the campaign, after they won, they indicated they had up to about 20% more efficiency in their buying. And what that meant is that if they had bought on traditional age sex demos, they would have under-delivered, keeping money the same, but buying on traditional age sex demos, they would have under-delivered against their targets by 20%. And when you think about how close some of those states were with Florida within 1%, 2%, Ohio 3%, you know, getting that 20% extra energy, extra communication against your segment is incredibly important. It was incredibly valuable. And the way they bought was also very different in terms of they went much deeper in their buys. So they were going up to buying 60 networks in a market, cable and broadcast stations, compared to what the other folks were doing, which was only about 18. The other folks were pretty traditional. And actually, I heard yesterday from one of the Republican folks in the conference yesterday that one of the things that the other side felt was they looked at media as simply a cost, as simply buying bumper stickers in a way. And I think the folks at Obama for America understood the real importance, not just on the television side, but also on the digital side, of understanding the power of fragmentation, the power of segmentation, and finding a research tool that allowed you to deliver those targets in a more efficient way. So I think, in summary, our footprint of millions of households allows advertisers and politicians to hone in on what we call advanced demographics, those specific segments that you really need to talk to win that extra 1 or 2% share, to win the election, to win being picked off the shelf, and to do that in an efficient way. That's what this research was really able to help them do. Thank you.
And now Allison Arling-Giorgi.
Thank you very much. So, wait for the presentation to show up. So I'll switch gears a little bit. So what I'll be sharing with you today is a preview to some of the research we'll be releasing actually at the end of this month that focuses solely on Generation Z. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Generation Z is currently under 16 years old. Probably all familiar with millennials, about 16 to 34-year-olds. But this is the new generation, what's coming next, essentially. So our new research will be focusing on data relating specifically to 7 to 13-year-olds, so the tween demographic, but also projecting on who these consumers will be in the future as adults and what you need to know to speak with them. So we have conducted this research over the last couple of months by talking to not only 7 to 13-year-old kids, boys and girls, but also their parents in compliance with COPPA laws. So we have utilized both quantitative and qualitative research. And what's important to remember about the intelligence group, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we have a proprietary panel that we've built from the ground up where we hand recruit all of our panelists that we use for our ongoing research with the Cassandra Report, which is our publication that comes out 4 times per year, and also for the research we do on the proprietary basis for our clients. So what I wanted to do is tell you a little bit about the findings that came out of our research report. So again, this is a preview, but it'll give you a good sense of who these consumers are today and also our projections for who they will be in the future. Now keep in mind that this generation is about 46 million in the United States alone, which is about roughly half the size of millennials. But it's important to consider that this generation currently today, even between 7 to 13-year-olds, are largely the main drivers behind parents' purchases. So they definitely have a voice in their family. They have an opinion that they want to have heard. And so it's important to start communicating with them from a very young age while you can, or at least have a better understanding of who they are. So first and foremost, this generation is a group of digital natives. Millennials are obviously very, very adept in the digital space, but with Generation Z, for many of them, they've been born into a world without having any say whether they have a digital identity or not. And we can look to parents who are utilizing WombTube. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, look that up, to document their pregnancies from day one or announcing their children's impending birth on Facebook. For many of these kids, they don't have a choice in the matter. They're born with a digital identity or a digital dossier. So when we look at their technology use, it's not surprising to see that 2/3 of tweens would rather get a tech gadget over toy. We obviously see anecdotally a lot of young kids, 2, 3 years of age, that are already swiping the television or swiping a magazine and can't figure out why it doesn't work. But 57% are accessing the internet from a mobile phone. So they have access to technology and mobile devices and are much more adept at using those from a young age. And currently, YouTube, TV networks, and virtual worlds are their go-to websites where they're spending the most time. And for many of you, it's important to remember that for virtual worlds, a lot of these young people are experiencing their lives first in the digital space before even in the real world, whether it's making purchases or making new friends or even going on their first virtual date, if you will. So it's important to consider that this generation is far more plugged in than any other generation, and there's huge implications for that. They're online researchers. So more than half of tweens, so again, the 7 to 13-year-old group, are doing some sort of product research online before making a purchase in store. Now, it's not surprising that they're not using e-commerce because for many of the 7 to 13-year-olds, they don't have a credit card yet, so they'd have to get that from their parents. But they're already utilizing the online space to do their research, and many of them are visiting Amazon on a regular basis. In fact, anecdotally again, we've heard from a lot of our parents on our panel who've said in the holiday season, their tweens provided a list for websites they needed to visit or stores they needed to go to. And oh, by the way, mom and dad, if you're going to a store, bring an Amazon Flow app and check if the price is cheaper online. So this generation's very adept at that online research. So they're looking to the online space for ideas and products before making purchases in store. They're using it as a research tool for themselves and are very well versed in that space and are savvy consumers. They have a need to be heard. Now, this is very, very important. We've talked about millennials in the past. For any of you who are familiar with our research, we know, and we've heard throughout the last couple days, that this generation values transparency and collaboration. They want to have a say when it comes to the advertising and marketing and the brands that they're communicating with. So 25% of tweens say that they wish their voices were heard by brands who are developing new products for them, and they want those products that are for them. And 60% of tweens would rather have a customized product over something that everyone else has. We've heard the quote time and time again, I want to be different like all of my friends. Go figure. But they're looking for something that's customized and truly personalized to them. And 30% of the tweens we talk to want to be able to customize their own products as well. So they want something that makes it a little bit more unique and different. Obviously, the digital space really lends to this very well. So that's why they're turning to that as their primary tool. So collaboration is very, very important, and also finding products and services that are specifically for them. So a lot of those campaigns that we're seeing out there that incorporate their online identity, even from a young age, but as they get older, are more and more relevant. And advertising attitudes, now this is a very important area for all of you in the room, but for tweens today, from 7 to 13, they're looking for advertising and marketing that is funny, that has humor behind it, that makes them laugh. And I think it's interesting when you look at the top commercials that Generation Z, that catch their attention, and the advertising that sticks out to them, that we have 2 insurance companies on the list. And we know that 7 to 13-year-olds are not buying insurance for themselves. They won't be for a while. But with Geico and Allstate, they really have a great way of communicating with this audience. And you can already tell there's an awareness there. So when they are buying insurance, they feel like that brand gets them. Maxwell the Pig comes up time and time again, as does the Mayhem commercials from Allstate. So these are the ones that they are sitting back and tuning in for and are excited for when they come on television because they feel like there's a sense of humor. It's almost like that water cooler moment for them and their friends, but obviously at a very, very young age. And 20% want brands and or ads that teach them something or inspire them. So again, it's no surprise that you see brands like Nike or Apple show up on this list. So there's an awareness that occurs from a young age, and this awareness translates to sales, for many of them influencing their parents on what it is that they should be buying, but also to their loyalty as they progress as consumers and they get older. So something that's relatable and something that makes them feel something when it comes to advertising, an ad that makes them feel an attachment or relation to a brand is important to this generation for a very young age. So you probably have heard a lot about millennials and Generation Y and who they are as consumers and how big and powerful they are as a group. And that is all very, very true. But we're starting to hear a lot more from our clients as well as your clients. What's next? Who are these consumers? How do I have to start thinking about them? How will I have to tailor what it is that I do to their needs? So again, as I mentioned in the research, we talked to their parents, and we thought that this quote kind of summed it up well on who this generation is, what they expect from brands, and what they expect from you. So they cherish technology, as I mentioned earlier. It's a huge part of their life. They're digital natives, and they want something that they can customize. We often use the iPhone or the iTouch as the perfect example of this because it's something that there's a standard mechanism there, but it can be totally customized to their needs. There's no 2 iPhones that are the same or no 2 iTouches that are the same. They're savvy shoppers. So Gen Z expects to be able to purchase what they want, when they want, and often immediately online. Again, anecdotally, we've seen a lot of young people who are very well versed at making purchases online, even without their own credit card. If they know their parents have an account somewhere, items will show up on the doorstep and their 8-year-old has made the purchase and the parents weren't aware of it. But they're pretty good at that. And absence of status is also really important. So this obviously goes hand in hand with, they're not necessarily acknowledging authority figures as someone that's so high above them anymore. They're much more relatable and they're looking for collaboration. They're an independent, self-starting generation. They want to be talked to at a peer-to-peer level, and it's something to remember going forward as you communicate with them. So there's a lot of things to look forward to with Generation Z. It's a generation you need to start understanding now, today. We know that there's sensitivity there with many of them being so young, but understanding who they are will help you in the long term understand and market to them and advertise them to them effectively. Thank you.
And now Joan FitzGerald from comScore.
Okay, thank you very much for staying for our research presentations. Sometimes research can be kind of dry, but what I love about the presenters is that we're all doing case studies of research. And the case study that I'm going to show you today is really an application of big data. We've talked a lot about big data at this conference, and at comScore, we indeed are a big data company, and I'm going to show you the ways that we're using it. And we're using it a lot differently than we have in the past. Is there something wrong with my mic? Yeah. Do I have to take off my necklace or something?
God just wanted to make sure everybody was paying attention.
All right. Is that a little bit better? I hope so. Okay, so at comScore, we are a big data company, and I'm going to talk to you about that and show you how we use big data and how it's really changing the way that we bring measurement solutions to the marketplace. So, as to start off with, as we know, the multi-platform world is very complex. And one thing that I think is remarkable about this conference is how much we've really discussed the digital platforms, the mobile platforms, the PC platform, and how that's transitioning into the TV space, and how the ecosystem is changing, how consumers use media is changing. In addition, this Generation Z presentation, how their attitudes about advertising are also changing. This morning when I was at breakfast, I was talking about some research that I'd done a decade ago when advertising was being introduced into the movie theaters. And in that series of interviews, I interviewed, I guess they were millennials at the time, a young demographic versus old demographics, and it was just remarkable how the attitudes about advertising had changed, how there was less cynicism, how there was a lot of excitement about advertising in movie theaters. It was just kind of how much consumers, especially young demographics that are embracing a lot of these new technologies, have really changed the way we think about marketing and we think about media. So the multi-platform world is complex, and the question that comScore, we at comScore ask ourselves every day is, how are we going to measure it? And it used to be that consumption in the digital world was relatively simple. People consumed content through the PC or their Mac, and they had a couple of browsers at their disposal, and we used a lot of cookies. We established a panel of consumers that we still have in place. 2 million consumers worldwide incorporate comScore meters on their PCs, and we measure their activity. And now things have really changed. We have tablets, we have TVs, we have smartphones. If you had the chance to see the mobile panel yesterday, they talked about this very issue. There are only 5 browsers approximately that you use on a PC or a Mac, but that number just explodes when you're talking about the mobile environment. Each device acts differently. Each app acts differently. And so it's very, very complex to measure. And I also put a TV on the screen too, because TV is changing. This year, almost all of the new television sets that are shipped will be interactive TVs. That means they intersect with the home Wi-Fi, and you can automatically bring up an internet connection via your television set. You know, just imagine the kind of changes that technology can bring to the consumer's experience of what we are used to consider traditional TV commercials. And actually, I guess I'm thinking what we'll be talking about 3 to 5 years down the road is, you know, we'll be looking back and saying, ooh, that used to be a traditional TV commercial. Now the world has really opened up to consumers on so many different devices. So one thing that we do track is the amount of internet interaction that happens on the different platforms. And a few years ago, when we first started tracking it all the way to the left here, we saw, wow, you know, about 6% of digital hits of web traffic is now coming from non-computer platforms. And as you can see, that number just continues to grow, where it's 12% of internet interactions now are happening on mobile devices, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. The other is the importance of gaming devices, you know, Xbox that are connected, and also we're beginning to see smart TV usage data in these numbers. So we think that this number is going to continue to grow. When we also look at the adoption of mobile devices, you find that mobile devices are adopted to a point that it took PCs about 10 years to get to. So just the whole adoption cycle is much faster than it used to be. So every day, here's a really interesting graph, and it's how consumers use the digital platforms throughout the day. And what you see is that the smartphones, which are the green line, is kind of things start kicking in the morning, and consumers are snacking throughout the day. They're using their smartphone kind of consistently throughout the day and into the evening. Versus when you look at PCs, of course, as you might expect, PCs are really ruling the midday when consumers are at work. And then tablets, look at where tablets have their peak. It's right during prime time in TV. And if that doesn't suggest new kinds of marketing strategies to engage consumers with your marketing messages, I don't know what does. But the tablet, the opportunity for consumers to use their tablets simultaneously with television, and for us to leverage that to reach these consumers more effectively, I mean, the time is really now to start those kinds of marketing programs. So what do we have? We have content being consumed across multiple devices by the same person throughout the day. And you know, that's where the challenge really comes in from measurement, is how do you figure out that all of this activity is coming from the same person? It's really important as a marketer to measure what we call in the measurement world from a single source. That means we're capturing behaviors from the same people and the same households. You know, it's kind of not good enough to model it together. We've talked about fusion, and we've used fusion techniques for literally decades. I remember being at a conference, an ESOMAR conference, probably 20 years ago, where we were debating, we had hot debates about what the best form of fusion is. And you know, what we know today is the best form of fusion is really no fusion at all. It's really trying to get to measuring behavior on a cross-platform basis from the same people and the same households. And that's what comScore considers its greatest measurement challenge right now. So what is a platform? Well, a platform is a combination of content, apps, video, banner ads, you know, all kinds of different content that's enabled by the digital platforms, and traditional television advertising too, of course, and device, whether it's a computer, a smartphone, a tablet, a television set, a smart TV. And what we want to answer is who and how many consume content across the various platforms. We want to measure their engagement with the content. The amount of time that consumers spend with content is very important in this equation. And then we need to get to how do we monetize this audience and drive strategic growth. And we're going to give a couple of case studies about the importance that mobile is playing in the overall audience metrics in the digital space in just a minute. And then the big question is, what's the person-level overlap between computers, smartphones, tablets, and TV audiences? So we really want to put it all together. So how do we do this? Well, as I mentioned, the digital world is complex, and what we found is that relying on consumer research panels that are relatively small is simply not enough to measure the digital world, especially when you are getting into new capabilities, even in the traditional television space, like addressable advertising and interactive advertising. These are really opportunistic types of advertising where you can have many small groups of people who are interacting with that content, and over time, that builds up to something important. But it's not necessarily the case that all of the consumption is going to be done at one time, or that you're going to get the kind of Super Bowl reach out of that opportunity. You know, you may be getting small reach over time, but consumers are really interacting with the brands and interacting with your content. So we need different solutions. One of the panels, in fact, talked about this yesterday, that small panels, the incidence rates makes a huge difference with these kinds of panels. If you have something that's only happening, you know, less than 1% of the time, just think about the math when you're using a panel of 20,000 or even 30,000 or 40,000 people. You know, those kinds of activities are important to us, and they tend to disappear in small research panels. So what comScore leverages is our census network. Our clients incorporate a comScore tag in their digital video, in the content that's now being shared on smart TVs, in the websites, in their advertising, on their players. And so every time a consumer interacts with that content or is served that content on the digital platform, comScore also gets a server call with the kind of information we need to evaluate that data. So for the census network, we don't get any personally identifiable information or PII, and we don't know who the consumer is, but this is an excellent way to measure overall activity and really just the sheer volumetrics of what's happening as consumers interact with brand with brand messages on the digital platforms and content on the digital platforms. And this slide really sums it up. I mean, we are truly a big data company. We capture 1.5 trillion digital interactions per month. So when you talk about big data, this is what our focus area really has been, to put this asset in place and to make it meaningful in the measurement space means we not only have to collect that data, but we've got to process that data. We have to have new systems to report that data. And really, that's some of the exciting things that are happening at comScore is our investments in that area. So when we look at that census network of data, we can make observations in the data that allow us to say, you know, there's enough indication in the behavioral data for us to say that, well, this device and this smart TV, that data's coming from the same household. And even moreover, to say, you know, that's likely to be a single-person household. This is likely to be a multiple-person household. So again, we don't know the identity of the household, but we can make observations in the behavioral data that allow us to isolate households and people from whom we're collecting data on a single source basis, and that's very exciting. We've identified about 1 million consumers in households where we're able to capture usage across multiple devices. And this isn't just usage like generic, oh, they're using it. It's what they're doing too. It's what websites they're visiting. It's what mobile websites they're visiting. It's what apps they're using. So it's a very comprehensive kind of measurement. And what we find is that 1 million of those are using a smartphone and a PC laptop in the home. About 440,000 are also using a tablet. About 80,000 are using an iPod Touch. And another 110,000 are using some kind of interactive gaming console or smart TV. So it's really a rich data set to observe what consumers are doing in multi-platform homes. So what are we doing? We're putting it together. You know, we're still using our person-centric consumer research panels, the kind of panels that we know in a traditional sense. We have now incorporated this new asset, which is this overlap panel, where we can really look at cross-platform usage along with the breadth of census measurement for the digital world. And so I got a case study here about how multi-platform really tells the real story about what's going on with some of these media brands. And the case study I'm going to use is Facebook. So if we didn't have multi-platform measurement, and we only reported Facebook on the PC measurement, you'd think that their growth had ended and it was sort of on the decline in the US, and really nothing could be further from the truth. As you can see, they have an enormous audience, and there is a slight decline in the second half of 2012, but that's not really what's happening. What's really happening is that consumers are using Facebook on their mobile devices, on their smartphones and tablets. And that's not only sustaining the audience, but it's actually growing the audience over time. So Facebook's audience was large. It's getting even larger because of the opportunity for consumers to use Facebook on multiple platforms. When we look at the audience that's coming exclusively from the mobile platform, it's probably larger than you expect. These are from some very large digital brands that we all know and love, and you kind of look at the percent of their audience that's coming exclusively from the mobile platforms. It's pretty big. And multi-platform is, of course, important to brands as well. You know, here's a campaign that we did for a frozen vegetable brand where we measured the traditional television exposure as well as exposure on digital platforms. And what you find is that the digital platforms added about 12% exclusive reach. I'm sorry.
We need
sorry
one quick takeaway
This
just
is the
because
last
we're running
slide,
a little behind.
last slide. It's to the brand. So this is it. So what do we have? We've got person-centric insights, we've got it across all devices, and we measure all content and consumption. You know, it's a really exciting time to be in this measurement space because of these new challenges about putting all of the pieces together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, Day 3ers, for staying with us. Appreciate it.